Welcome to the WorkJoy Jam. I'm your host, Beth Stallwood, founder of Create WorkJoy, and I'm really excited today to be joined by Rebekah Wallis. Rebekah is an HR director, board director, director of people, ESG, CSR, everything to do with people at Ricoh. And we have a conversation today all about that world of giving back to the community, of getting out there, supporting the things that are going on, and how that can actually individually and collectively bring us a lot of joy and a lot of learning. I really was interested in how they've done it in their world of Ricoh and the impact it has had on individuals and teams, and actually how it's become something that has real momentum and is really integrated into how they do things like learning and development, with the idea of some mandatory volunteering that then becomes things that people really, really value and want to step into themselves. So I really hope you enjoy this conversation. I know I did. Here it is. Welcome to the WorkJoy Jam. I am so excited today to be joined by Rebekah Wallis, and I am going to let Rebekah tell you a bit of her story, who she is, what she does, and I am really excited for today's conversation because it's one where I think we have a really shared passion here. So Rebekah, before we get into our chat, can you tell our wonderful audience a bit about you and how you got to where you are today?
Of course. Good morning and hello. What I did was I grew up in the Fens, actually. So I grew up in the Fens. I had a very, very lovely childhood, actually, sort of very much countryside. My mum, my dad, my brother, very much into horses and riding. And then at 11, my world changed somewhat and my family broke up, which actually at my time was relatively unusual. Nevertheless, I subsequently sometime later actually gained an additional 3 stepsisters, all of who came to live with us, which was a different experience. So very busy household, very happy though, and surrounded by animals, a lot of outdoors, always on my feet, never sitting down, still continuing to ride, friends around the house all the time. So it was lovely. But having said that, I knew actually that the Fens wasn't for me. I needed more. I needed to see the world, and had no other intention from as far back as I can remember that I would go to university. I was actually the first from my family to go to university, so it wasn't something that was already written in stone. And I applied originally based on the advice of my school, which was quite a traditional school, to apply for law. So I applied for law, got a place for law to study law, and then during the sort of before I got my A-level results, suddenly had a moment of I don't want to do law. I'd spent some time actually. I know I'd spent some time actually, which I would always advocate having work experience because I think it helps you rule out what you don't want to do as much as it rules out what you do want to do. So I had done some work experience in a solicitor's, and I decided actually this probably isn't quite for me. And what I did was I leant back on my love of people, and I decided that I really wanted to study psychology. And because I loved animals and stuff, I didn't want at the time. There was only 2 courses in the whole of the UK that did human psychology, not animal psychology or applied psychology. So I applied to one of those courses, got it, and I have to say it was absolutely the best decision I made. I loved my degree. I loved my topic. I loved the whole student experience, and I never went back to live at home, which was always my intention. And I think it probably for me was my first chance to really, really be me, find who I am, what I love doing, and all of that. So as a result of that, kind of fast forward, and I'm sure we'll cover some more around the topic, I sort of, with a little bit more mind changing, of course, and some more work experience, I ultimately led into the career of human resources, albeit it was called personnel, of course, at the time.
Yeah.
And then my first job actually was in a big energy company, and it was just after it was privatized, and had a really fascinating 5 years there as we worked through sort of the mechanics of splitting the organization into 5 companies. I also spent the last period there, last 6 months, living in London, working, and that gave me my opportunity to sort of do the city side of things. I then went from that to a very commercial and customer facing HR manager role, which actually I really, really loved, which led me into my current role, where I'm now a board director with Ricoh and responsible for all of the people things, so HR, learning, and also corporate responsibility, which is now actually typically called ESG. But also, what I should say, reflecting on some of these things, when I throw back to my childhood, I still live in the country, somewhere else in the country, not in the Fens, in the Midlands. I also have a house filled with people, so I've got three young adults, mother to three young adults, and we also have lots of animals. So I kind of think, the reflection on the countryside and sort of my upbringing is still there. And I have to say, one thing about me is that I'm absolutely as happy in the city. I still go into London a lot. I'm as happy in a black tie sort of event as I am in Wallis, and that's probably the two that describes me quite well.
Love it. So the two sides of you, the outside work, going back to
Yeah.
that animals, big house family, all filled with people, and then filled with people and people's stuff in your working life as well.
Yes, indeed, it is.
Amazing. So the subject that I think we're going to dive into today, which I'm really excited about, and there are so many we could, because obviously with WorkJoy, the work that you do around people and learning and all of the stuff you do as a board director at Rico for your people, we could have gone down any angle of that to talk
Yeah,
about WorkJoy.
absolutely.
But I think the one where we have a real shared passion, I'm really interested in this, that we're going to focus on in today's conversation, is talking about this CSR, the ESG, the stuff around what you can do in your community and how that can actually bring you lots of joy. So, can we, to start with, talk a little bit about some of the things that you have been working on in your world and why they're important and what it's done for you? There's lots of questions there. Let's just start and we'll see where we go to.
So in terms of, so should we pick up on some of the corporate responsibility and sort
Totally.
of yeah, absolutely. So around the community investment stuff, absolutely. And this is, I think, as you're aware, this is my work joy.
Yeah.
I love, love, love. I love that opportunity to give back, to do something more. So that actually does, just before we dive into community investment, actually that is one of the things is I've learned about myself, is that what I love is enabling people, is sort of that kindness, that inclusion, helping people to believe in themselves actually, and that happens in the work environment, in your traditional professional life, as well as it does when you work in the community investment. And those two link really closely together. And I have to say, one of the things is I always say to people is my job is probably the best one in the company,
Yeah.
because I get the opportunity to do all of those things as part of my everyday job. But in terms of, if we dive into community investment activity, I am lucky to have that responsibility. I'm also lucky to work for a company where its foundations are built around that. That's sort of the three loves we talk of in Rico, and the founder did talk of, that love of your community, that love of the world, that love of your neighbour, and we can live that. So I get that, officially I'm allowed to, and it's sort of, encouraged to do that as part of my role. So typically we work with young people. That's typically our focus. So we have a couple of partnerships with external charities, not for profits. One is the Prince's Trust, which I think people will have heard of, and the other is business in the community. Now, we've specialised in some of those things. I chair a couple of boards for business in the community, but in terms of the activity, to give some examples, we will work with the Prince's Trust to run workshops they'd run a 12-week programme. We will work to run workshops on CVs, on interview skills. We also have the pleasure, and like it is something that you do have to take, I definitely have to take a tissue along to, of the presentations at the end of this 12-week program that these young people have been on, where parents come along, actually local dignitaries, the mayor will come along, and as part of this they tell their story, and until that point you may have interacted with them. Also, we have them for work experience, but you haven't heard their stories, and seriously, it is mind-blowing, heartbreaking, emotional beyond belief. And even talking about it, I can feel, oh my goodness. And the thing that comes out of it is you just want to do more. You're just like, how can I do more to support these wonderful people that maybe have not had the best start, the best luck, different things have happened, or just that, that sort of mental health point of view, they've not been in a position to go through the normal transition from school into work and so on. And it's just, oh my goodness, uplifting. So those things. The other thing we do actually, which is a similar experience, albeit we just do the one day, is we've done a lot of work in prisons. So we go along and do CV interview type workshops with current serving prisoners. And that, again, the experience of going in at the beginning of the day, and quite typically, maybe you'll have 15 people in there. They may actually not know what they've come along to. They'll typically be nearing release. And you talk to them as an employer, and you can see at the beginning of the day, it's kind of like, what have I been brought along to? Like, oh, I'm not a bit disengaged. Nobody's going to tell me anything. Da, da, da. And you can see that their self-belief, bearing in mind some of these people may have been in prison for, say, 20 years. And imagine if you even have, I don't know, 6 weeks off work, 2 weeks off work for holiday, you go back and the world's changed. It's, and they haven't had that contact with the outside world. So their perception and their self-belief, you know, typically is not where it needs to be, and they do not, a lot of them, believe that any employers would have any interest at all in employing someone who's been in prison. So that's their starting point. And you imagine coming out of prison in that context is, if you believe it's not going to happen, we all know it's not going to happen. And as you go through the day and you spend time with these people, you see this self-belief change until at the end of the day you've got this person who sort of suddenly sees a whole different future for themselves. And what I would say is that it's not just a different future for themselves, but if that person comes out with a view to getting a job, gets employment, gets a stable living environment, the impact on their families, of course, and the communities, let's not forget, is massive. So it's that bit of helping one person. I would say every little bit helps. Any single thing you can do, actually, you're not just helping that one person, you're helping all the people surrounding that person in the community as well.
Amazing. And such an interesting and diverse range of things that you're focusing on and spending time and thought and effort into around, the Prince's Trust staff, a full program with work experience, etc. And then it's a really interesting one as well. Like, I'd love to know, obviously this is your specialist area, this is something that you do for your business, but also there must be some personal connection to that, to be able to kind of go, okay, what is it that I'm trying to get to the point of, like, why did you decide to focus in those areas with the Prince's Trust and with the prisons areas? Was there a kind of a meaning behind it that helped you get involved in the first place? Because I know you've been doing this work for kind of some time now.
From the sort of the young people aspect, we do. It was kind of there is a benefit to the business. That wasn't our reason for doing it, and I can talk separately about the benefits to the business. So the young people, it's that at the time, I think there's typically, actually, even now, there's always more young people unemployed than the rest of the economy.
Yeah.
And that's the same coming out of COVID as we are now. In terms of prison, actually, it was triggered by seeing is believing a visit that my CEO did at the time, and was taken into a prison. Now, one of my philosophies on life actually is seeing is believing. And so every single activity we've done, I've always kind of been, I do it myself first, basically, because I think there's two things. One is just check out what it's like. Two, if you haven't done it, you can't really talk about it, or you can't talk about it with the passion I like to talk about things. So that was really triggered by seeing his believing visit through business in the community that my CEO did, and he sort of came back thinking, gosh, surely we can do more for these things, for these people. So I think there's and you could argue all of these things in terms of the link with work is, are they trying to give people the skills or the confidence or the belief to be employable. In terms of self-belief, I guess I hadn't really reflected on it in that context, but there have been some learnings for me. And as I said, I am a mother of 3 children. My oldest daughter has very severe learning difficulties, and when you're sort of first a mother, you aren't given a rule book. It's and apologies to all the people who aren't parents out there to talk about this, but it's such a leveler, as my mother would say. Illness is a leveler, because if you're ill, you've got no advantage, you've got no privileges. I think the same's true when you first have a baby, to some extent, is you're sort of it does help you. You're suddenly got all these things to deal with that you've not got experience of. You're no better than anyone else. You've not done it before. So to have that as my first child was big learning experience actually. And I think what it has done is it's certainly, I've always said, it's made me a better person by far. It's made, whilst I would never wish it on, Isabel herself, my family, the rest of them, it does make you better people. And the way it makes you better people is that it makes you focus without realizing it on what people can do. You don't go, oh,
Yeah.
she can't do that, she can't do that, she can't do that. You go, oh my goodness, look, she's done that. Oh, look, she said that. And what's really interesting is an observation I have is when we work with these young people, and particularly when we bring them in on work experience, the impact on the managers is significant. So the managers, for these young people that have come in and they know they're sort of starting from a different, less privileged position, arguably, they don't look at what they can't do. They look at what they can do, and they get immense pleasure about helping them do what they can do even better and getting more confident about things they can't do. And suddenly that has an impact on their own team because they're suddenly looking at what can people do. Oh my goodness, they do that brilliantly. They don't do that so well, but that doesn't matter. We'll get someone else to do that. And it's so I guess there is that personal link of that sort of having that very positive perspective on a can do rather than a can't do, which I have in my life through my own life experience, which then you can bring into work. And I see that happen to other people who perhaps haven't had the same life experience in our managers.
I'm sitting here listening and loving the term and the phrase, like seeing is believing. It's like actually go out there and discover and see what is going on. And we often might think, and I think this is the interesting part about doing things in the world of corporate social responsibility, of the environmental, social, all of that side of life, is we often think that it's there because we're going to do some good in the community, and it's that kind of philanthropic type of thing. But it's really interesting you saying here, but what people come back with is more than that. They actually come back with enhanced skills and abilities and understanding as well.
They do, and it's a really good observation of yours to say that, because you're absolutely right. I do think that, and I had this view as well, that people think volunteering is just one way.
Yeah.
I would say we've actually, because of the nature of my role of spanning the different areas, I'd had this long dream that, we must be able to do something with community investment that ties community investment activity to development.
Yeah.
So we launched a sort of pyramid almost of leadership programs, and we have still continued this philosophy whereby, as part of that program, part of the learning was a community investment activity. So typically, as an HR director, you might go out and you'd say, right, come in, do me some team building with this team. And what we now do is we say, no, we'll use community investment activities. So, team, and they'll do it within teams as well, not just as part of their ongoing sort of work. Raise money for a soup kitchen, effectively, a homeless shelter. Go in, cook the dinner for them, spend the day with them, and honestly, the pleasure the people get out of this, it is the best day they've had. It also, interestingly, the reason I like doing it, and I felt this myself, is it pushes you outside your comfort zone.
Yeah.
And I think we're all aware that if you push yourself not too far, but outside your comfort zone, you learn. And so just tying those things together, it's almost an obvious, why wouldn't you use these activities, which people wouldn't naturally do? We call it sort of laughingly mandatory volunteering.
Yeah, I mean,
what you will do,
it's like oxymoron, isn't it? Mandatory volunteering.
What you will do is you will be volunteering. And it's and you know what the learning is? What's really interesting for me is there's certain divisions which, like, we couldn't do that. I'd never do this all my life. I've never volunteered. I wouldn't do it. Not something I'd do. They come back and they're like, right, when can I go again? Let me do it again. I loved it. And that's the real proof of the point. And we also actually just, in terms of for people who like data, we added a question into our pulse check saying, have you done some community investment activity in the last 6 months? And we found that constantly, the rating, the engagement levels were over 20 percentage points higher for those that had. Now, you could say it's chicken and egg, as in those who are more engaged, more likely to volunteer, but we know that the majority of our people were ones that we asked, told, said you will be volunteering. So, that is a benefit to the organisation without going into the, more engaged, the more productive, the more better, customer satisfaction, without having to have that link. It's, it is quite startling, actually, but also the skills bit, Beth, because that's a really good point, because quite often people don't think about using their skills. So they might think, I'll go and do something not related to what I work, but actually there is a real need for skills-based volunteering. So actually for someone to either use their skills to help someone so if you've got a startup organization, maybe IT skills, they don't have any of these things in house, but also mentoring and everyone in a working environment, I would say, or outside of a work environment, knows stuff. They know so much stuff. They've got life experience. They've had different experiences to another person, and therefore they can help them. So I'd say things like, any of those skills-based volunteering, like mentoring, people will be stunned by what pleasure they get from it. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, and it's such an interesting one. And the way I'm thinking about it as you're talking about it is, so many people are in the zone of, I'm really busy, I'm really busy, I'm really busy. I don't have time for this. I don't have time for these things. And this idea that you have linked it directly to people's development, that it's part of a program, that it's kind of in your working world, it's integrated into work versus being something additional on your to-do list.
Exactly.
I think that's a really smart and interesting way of doing it. And that idea that actually, go and try this will step you far out of your comfort zone. And I can imagine there would be people right now thinking, oh, that's a really interesting one. When you go and step into a prison environment, what does that feel like? And there might be some fear associated with some of that, right, to start with.
Definitely. And I felt that it was quite interesting, actually. When we first did our Prince's Trust workshop, we engaged with someone fairly local to the office who'd run these courses for years and years. We were invited in. I was pretty scared, I'll be honest with you. We were told, you'll be faced with 15 to 18 very disengaged young people. If they may not talk, they may decide they're going to walk out, all this sort of thing. I'm like, okay, interesting. So we went along, pretty terrified. And actually it worked well. What the funny bit, the sort of punchline is, actually, it wasn't the young people I needed to be scared of. The course leader, actually, ex-Marine, had never, ever, ever let anyone, any employer, anywhere near his program.
Right.
If we had slipped up at any point, apparently we were straight out the door. So actually we survived, and he works with us all the time, and it's an amazing thing. But that's but was I terrified before I went in? Yes. Was I nervous about going to prisons? Yes. And would I still be if I do it again? Yes, because actually that pushing yourself outside your comfort zone doesn't go away just because you've done it once, because obviously you're faced with a different group of people. But I think that's why, because you've pushed yourself, why you get so much benefit and pleasure from it.
Yeah. And that's an interesting one, isn't it, as well, about how the pleasure of volunteering, how that can actually give you some work joy in your life. And it's not necessarily the work that you are, if you looked at your job description and your salary and the work that you're paid to do, it's diving into something else that can give you something that you maybe don't get in your usual working day.
That's absolutely right. So yeah, that's absolutely right. Apologies, my daughter just came in.
That's all right. Hello.
She's gone.
We're a family-friendly podcast. It's cool.
Absolutely. Bless. She knew I was talking about her, I think. Most probably. So Beth, in terms of the sort of WorkJoy, yeah, absolutely. When you reflect on and I'm sure you do this, I'm sure we all do this, when you reflect on the days you remember from work.
Yeah.
I reflect on the days I've done community investment activity, the days I've gone into prisons, the day when I was talking about that workshop, the day I ran that workshop, because it somehow, for whatever reason, sets in your memory so strongly. I think because it is such a different experience. It is different to our everyday job. It's different to what your typical job description looks like, and it's different in terms of the people you meet, of course. So your brain is probably processing all this stuff. You're probably at night dreaming about it, but your brain's thinking of all the learning it's picked up from the day. And maybe that's why it stays in your memory so strongly. I'm not sure, but it certainly doesn't. It stays as a very positive one for me. And, I get that warm feeling when I think about these things.
Yeah. And it's really interesting to have an organisation that is really focused and has this at the heart of what they do. And a lot of organisations will have a CSR and ESG or whichever version of it. I mean, there's many acronyms for the work that we're talking about here, and some people are offering, paid volunteering days to go and get people to help their local community, and some people, go and read in local schools or whatever it is. And I think that interest and that focus is when we can kind of sideline in our minds, because it seems like it's just something that you go and do for a day. But I love the way you were talking about this, and I'm gonna remember this one about thinking about the days you remember at work. What comes to mind? Because that is a really great way of thinking about and understanding what gives you the work joys. If this is one of those things, then you know that that's the things that stay in your mind, the things that you remember about work. I love that. So if you don't mind, I might take that for a little bit and ask some other people that question as well.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, please do.
So for you personally, tell me a little bit about this. So obviously you have a role that includes this as your part of your job. But for you personally, when you're out there and you're, as you say, you're doing the seeing is believing stuff, you're out there experiencing it yourself. What are some of the things that you find give you the joy when you're out there doing activities with other people, with young people, with people who may not be in the kind of work system as it is at the moment, and you're trying to help people? I think you said that what you loved is helping people in all kinds of situations. So I'd love to know a little bit more about you personally and how that works for you.
Yeah. So I do this in work as well, actually, to be fair, albeit it's, again, you could argue it's volunteer. So I do opt to mentor people actually externally, but also within the role. And I think where my particular, I don't know if it's sweet spot or the bit where I get particular joy is where I identify someone who's maybe I can recognize some of the things that I have maybe experienced. So that where you're, where I wouldn't say I was always the most confident of people, it's a sort of, I've learned I'm obviously pretty resilient in terms of having, the role I do and things, but that wasn't the case when I set out at work. And I think where I can see people who haven't truly realized their talent, their ability, whether that's inside or outside of work, that's where I feel I can particularly add value, because I can talk. I'm not assuming everyone is the same as me, but I can talk very honestly about what's helped me. What's helped me with doing certain things. Where and and also just sometimes just someone believing in someone else is all it needs, and someone that makes someone look at themselves. I think people typically don't realize how good they are, and they don't always, and you get the situation where they don't realize how others see them. And then if people do say things, I don't believe it. So it's kind of, and I've been through all that. People used to say, positive things about things that I thought I was really bad at, and I just thought, oh, they're just being nice. And it's just and I probably still do it to some extent. Let's be honest; these things never go away. And I think sometimes you have to step outside of that. And if I can give somebody the ability to sort of step outside of all those inner thoughts and actually try and see themselves from someone else's perspective. And also, I don't think we're very good at comparing ourselves to others. That sounds a really weird thing. So I don't mean comparing ourselves to others, but we never sort of always go, oh gosh, they're really good. Oh my goodness, look at that. Or I wish I was brave enough to do that. And you don't actually know how you compare because you can't see yourself. Everyone else sees you, you don't. So that's where feedback obviously comes into it, but you have to ask for it and you have to believe it. But I think that that's where I get real work joy, where I can see someone, I can think of examples where I've had people who have been terrified of maybe speaking in either a meeting, speaking in a group, and kind of just worked with them through that, like, come here, sit down, we're going to do this. I think what's lovely is when people, this sounds weird, but I feel real joy when people show their vulnerability and then you can work with it. And when I think of an example, when we're in one of the prisons, and you can imagine, without stereotyping, it's tough in prisons, and maybe you can't show your vulnerability, shall I say?
Yeah.
And one of the interviews we did, and we do sort of mock interviews, so we give them the opportunity to be interviewed, and then to interview with us, sort of thing, to help in a role play type scenario. And we all know role plays are horrible and everyone hates them, so we are pretty mean from that point of view. But one guy in particular, he showed his vulnerability that it really, really stayed with me. And he was genuinely, he genuinely studied this job description. He genuinely thought about what he'd say in an interview. He was genuinely really nervous and showing it to his, prison colleagues. And I think, I just wanted to offer him a job, and he came out, and I tried to facilitate that. And it's, if you can really help people to really lose all their sort of, all the things that the masks we wear, and get down to what they are, and then build themselves, into what they really are, and really understand that and believe it. That is my ultimate joy. And that's inside of work, that's outside of work, with the young people we work with and everything. The frustration is, you want to do more of it, and there's never the opportunity all the time, that particular individual.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing, is that you actually then want to kind of try and find people that you want to help more.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'd be really interested to know, and I know you said that you had amazing survey results around the impact it had on how engaged people feel, but do you have any idea about how people actually go on, and do they do more? Do they volunteer in a different way? Do they kind of get involved beyond the mandatory volunteering side of things?
Yeah, they do actually. And so we've got examples of where in prisons where we've had people going to a prison for a workshop, say a manager, when we're trying to get buy-in from senior managers, and then they come out and they want their whole team to go, and then they don't just want their whole team to go, they want to have someone on placement from a prison, on release on temporary license, and then they want to help that person, and then they want to offer them a job. So there's that bit of it. The other experiences or examples we've had is where people have been involved with say one of the programs with the Prince's Trust, and they've then gone on to they've asked if they could be a mentor. And we do offer a lot of mentoring, both internally and externally. And these people actively say, I've put myself up individually to be a mentor, and I'm mentoring in this. And other people have sort of made connections in other organisations they know, and supporting people. So definitely there does seem to be this, it doesn't just end on that first day or that one day.
Yeah, I love that, because it's just then building its own momentum. You then don't have to maybe necessarily force people as much. It goes from mandatory volunteering into actually kind of passion-based volunteering, where people really want to do it, and you're not necessarily having to force people to go and step out their comfort zones, because they're doing it for themselves. And that, for me, is a massive part of WorkJoy as well, is people taking that personal responsibility to do the stuff that helps them, that works for them, that brings them some joy. And I do think sometimes, we all get into a state sometimes when we're in work, and maybe we've been in our jobs a while and we know what we're doing, and there's that kind of day-to-day stuff that could get a little bit boring, and something like this might help you step out of that.
I absolutely agree. I think I think when we think about anything which gives us a different perspective, I think the danger is I mean, you're more than aware, when none of us are aware of our own privilege.
Yeah.
And I think you can get stuck. You also don't realize, I think, when I talk about not comparing ourselves, not everyone's good at knowing where they, how good they are at stuff, or their own value. I think also we can get into our job, our organization. We don't realize, again, how that looks compared to external things. And I think just opening up that perspective, being very curious about the rest of the world, it helps us understand what different lives are about, and what impact that brings. And I think it does. It's almost like when we talk about well-being, go for a walk in the middle of the day. It kind of like it gives you just your brain, it opens it up. You see different, sort of things, and you come back and you're so much better. And I think it does that for you as well. But also the interesting thing I find, and this has always been quite significant to me, is when I have mentored people inside and outside work, albeit that's in more of a professional role they would be in. Every single one of them has said, the impact this had on my family is amazing. It's been really positive.
Wow.
And I think that is always brilliant. And we are, you know, we are the same person inside and out of work. I think we artificially try to split these things, but
it's all
but,
one
you know,
life,
that's
right?
it is, you know what, this work-life balance thing, it is kind of like, it isn't a balance one or the other.
No.
It is it
Yeah.
just is.
I always say that, and actually I've been writing the WorkJoy book, and one of the things I've been saying in there about is our life is a big thing and work is a part of that. It's not a separate thing. It's not something we have to have this equal balance, life and work. It's actually, life is part of work and work is part of life, and there is so much that goes through that made up barrier from how you feel about work to how you feel at home. And you're not two separate people. You might have a professional filter that you put on when you're at work, and there might be slightly different things and ways you do stuff, but actually you're the same human being. And if you've had a great experience at work, that does translate into your home life as well. Of course it does, and vice versa.
Yeah, that is so, so true. And I think that's the, you know, the core linking the work and the life outside of work is you. So, you know, there's got to be something in there that translates. And you're absolutely right. We've all had those days when we've come home and it's maybe not been the best day, or vice versa. It's been the best day, and it definitely impacts your way of thinking, your way of behaving, everything. So I think it's really important. And that's the thing, is, so maybe I'm saying these benefits we get at work, I'm sure those benefits are going back into the home life as well.
Yeah. And, you know, that idea that by doing this, stepping out of our comfort zone, getting curious, seeing other people from a different world from us, understanding the privilege, you know, maybe that just the privilege of not being in prison is one of the things that people can understand and better, and then be more open and understanding and empathetic to people who live a life that is different to us. And not just helping that, but, you know, helping ourselves understand that we have a role to play in that, and we can help and do some different things.
I think that's the thing. And I think certainly with prisoners, I think that is something that I should have said, is I think what we all, you know, I think one of the biggest findings for managers that we have feedback, or not just managers, but anyone who goes into prisons, is that these are people they meet in the pub. You know, they've got this image, this stereotype of what these people would be like, you know, trepidation, fear, you know, something to be scared of. They're not, you know,
they're all human beings, right?
Just like us, you know, and therefore, you know, just their life course was different, and it could have been any one of us.
And that's such an interesting thing, isn't it? Is that we always assume, because it's a natural human thing, that, you know, the otherness of people, they are other from us, and you go and you realize that actually we're all just humans.
Yeah,
I love that.
absolutely.
Oh, it's been amazing talking to you. I am going to move us on, if it's okay, to think about some quick fire questions. And I think this first question you have answered kind of in the bigger picture stage, but I'm going to ask you a more micro bit, like a daily thing that you could do. And I'd love to know what's always guaranteed to bring you some work joy.
Actually, talking to other people is, I've noticed that about myself, which is probably the other thing. So if I have a day when I'm not doing much interaction with people, that's not my best days. But the thing that I really love is, it is a little bit of a repeat of what I've said. It's when, you know, the thing that really brings me work joy is that one-to-one, sort of in-depth, sort of mentoring type coaching conversation, where we're, you know, where we're having that real sort of learning, you know, where you can really support people, and vice versa. It works both ways. I learn so much from these activities. So that's it. But the thing I really love, actually, over the years, when I reflect, is when I've have teams of people, and when I've worked with someone in my team, say, and then you watch them do something, or they've done something, or they've produced something, and it just blows you away, and you know there is nowhere on earth that I could ever do something as good as that. And that is my absolute whoa. That's fantastic. You know, and it's just, I love that. I love people when they blow me away with how good they are. I get such a thrill from that.
Love that. So really kind of basking in other people's successes.
Absolutely.
Love it.
That's a lovely way of putting it. Yes.
I love that. Okay, next question. What book are you currently reading?
This is quite an interesting, actually, one, because I've gone back in time. Actually, I have just finished a book. I'll mention it because it was a novel of me to read it, I guess. But my youngest daughter started to read some sort of classics, as it were, and she got Animal Farm. And I'm like, oh, I read that when I was 14. I want to read it again. So I read Animal Farm, was my most recently completed book, and that was fascinating to read, something I'd read when I was 14.
Yeah.
And yes, and I think everyone knows the story of Animal Farm, but also how much I remembered of it stunned me, and the characters in it. So that was interesting. The other one actually that I'm actually actively reading at the moment, and this is, I'm really late to the party on reading this, although I know a lot of the stories from it, but it's Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell.
Oh, yeah.
Is what I'm reading at the moment. So again, just reminding yourself of some of those things is great, is great. And I do also read, although I haven't got one live at the moment, I typically do read for light reading. I'll read sort of your typical sort of Sunday Times bestseller novel type things.
Yeah.
I love stuff like that, but I haven't got one active at the moment.
Oh, brilliant. And Outliers, I love that book. So I think I might go back and read it. I do like a reread sometimes. I think it's a good thing
Absolutely.
to do. But yeah, a really great recommendation. Actually, maybe going back and reading some of those things we read when we were in school might be interesting. It's so amazing how it's still in your brain, though. It's like there somewhere in the back of it, being able to bring that back out. Brilliant. Thank you. Next question. What is, and I'm sure you've got many of these, so I'm going to ask you to pick one. What's the best or most useful bit of advice that somebody has given to you in your life that you always find yourself coming back to?
I have got two, but I'll stick with one unless you let me sneak.
You can
in
have
the
two.
other one.
It's okay.
Okay. So this is one actually, and I thought about this a lot, and it actually reflects on some of the stuff we're saying. So going outside your comfort zone. So it's somebody once said to me, I think I've mentioned, I'm never naturally the person who puts their hand up at a meeting to speak, or in a big group of people. And it's this thing about your comfort zone. It's this butterflies in your stomach thing, and I think someone said to me, it's the same hormone. It is your fight and flight fundamentally, but it's adrenaline, excitement, and fear. They're the same thing. So I started interpreting any sort of outside comfort zone as excitement rather than fear. And actually, it puts a completely different perspective on it. And the particular bit that really I put into practice a lot is when you're, say, in a busy meeting, something like that, and you get that feeling in your stomach because you really, really want to say something. And typically I might have not taken the opportunity, but someone said to me, that's actually, you really wanted to say something. That's the word that you really want to say to come out. And I've actually, if you reinterpret that and say, I really need to say these, it's been really useful advice actually, because it has, I do believe in, people having their say and everything. And it's helped me with, yes, I really must get this point across. And it's that just interpreting those butterflies as excitement rather than fear, and other things as well. And I use it quite a lot in coaching. I use it with my children, and it's something which I think is really useful.
Yeah, I was using the same bit of advice actually with a group of people I was working with yesterday about that. Physiologically, it is the same thing that's going on, but your brain is telling you that this is fear. And actually, if you can, and it takes some work, it's not an easy thing to do, but if you can start changing that to be, this means I'm excited, it means it's important, it means I care about this subject of what's going on, it does over time help you to use the adrenaline for good versus use it to feel nervous. So it's a really great bit of advice. Love it. And do you want to do the second one as well? I'll allow it.
I'll do the second one, because again, it's something I've used a lot, particularly during the last couple of years where, things have been tough, I think, for people, tougher maybe than normal. And it's just a very simple one about put your own oxygen mask on first. And that's in the context of, physical and mental health. And some of our managers, certainly my team, it's been tough supporting other people over the last 2 years at times. And I think quite often people haven't looked after themselves first, but we all know if you don't look after yourself, you're pretty rubbish to everyone else. And I think that seems to have been really powerful for people.
I think that's such an important one, especially if you think about even your situation. You've got kids at home. I know they might be young adults, but they're still in need of you. You're trying to work, you've got people to look after, you're trying to do all of these different things. There's so many people in similar situations where it has been really, really tough. And actually I've been looking for ages and I haven't found one yet. So if anyone can find one for us, looking for a new word for selfish, because selfish is always interpreted as a negative thing. And it's like, hang on a minute, because for me, self-care brings up all the kind of like, let's go and do some yoga and spend some time at a spa, which doesn't quite do it for me. But I need a word in between self-care and selfish that's a positive word that is looking after yourself first.
Yeah, and I always been so bad at it, Beth. So bad at it. And it's something over the last 2 years I've really tried, and it's really hard, I tell you.
It's so hard. And you have to think about it. Like when you talk about the things that bring you joy, helping other people, seeing the success of others,
Yeah,
the things that bring you joy is not taking care of yourself, it's taking care of other people.
exactly.
Yet there is this big kind of caveat to that, is you can't do that unless you're in a good place yourself.
Exactly. And so it's a work in progress.
Yeah.
Is what I'll say.
You and I maybe should talk more on this one offline, because I am also trying to bring in like the rest element into my life, and it's just not something I really understand or know how to do or value. So there's something here, isn't there, about even if it doesn't
Definitely.
bring you some joy, it is a baseline for making joy happen, because you won't
Yep.
be able to be in service of other people if you don't have a good
Exactly.
mental and physical health yourself to be able to make that happen. So
Exactly.
I'm going to jump in on board with you on that one, and we'll help
Brilliant.
each other work through
We
it.
will. Perfect. Sounds like a plan.
It does. Right. Next question. What is one super practical bit of advice that you could give to our listeners, that's something really easy, something simple that they could go and do now, tomorrow, the next day, that you think would help them build some work joy?
Gosh, I think it would be actually to maybe we should stick on the topic of maybe just look at where you think you might be able to help, do something in the community. I think that would, or find out your niche. For me, it was helping others, and I can do that inside and outside, but just really reflect. Maybe it's that point, reflect on what are the best days of your work life. What were you doing? What was it about that gave you a great deal of pleasure, and
Yeah.
enhance that and do more of it.
Yeah, love that. And it's so aligned to what we talk about in WorkJoy, which is actually find the stuff that really brings you joy, and wherever you can, do it a little bit more.
Yeah.
Or do it
Yeah.
more often. If you love talking to people but you haven't spoken to anyone today, pick up the phone and have a chat. Things like that, simple
Exactly.
things. But also I love that you could also look outside the stuff that you do beyond the four walls of a Zoom screen, wherever it is that you do your
Yeah.
work, stepping outside of that and seeing how you could use some of your skills or expand some of your skills by stepping out into a different world. Love it.
Exactly.
So thank you so much for joining us today, Rebekah. Where can people find out more about you, your work, or maybe more about some of these other amazing things that are out there that people might want to be looking at, how they can volunteer or set some things up with their organisation?
Well, I am on LinkedIn and Twitter, but I wouldn't say I am the best user of social media. However, I think I've probably, in terms of, I have mentioned extensively business in the community and Prince's Trust. And from a business perspective, business in the community at the very least gives people lots of tools they can use to help work with communities, like how do you make your recruitment inclusive, those sorts of things, even if they don't want to actively get involved in working with them, albeit if there are organisations out there who would like to know more, please do contact me. I can help with that, or business in the community directly.
Brilliant.
And in terms of the Prince's Trust, again, if there's anything people want to do to support that, again, on the website they would find information about that. But obviously, I think one thing I would say actually is, whilst I'm clearly not employed by either of those organisations, charities have struggled a lot over the last 2 years. So anything anyone can do, and I would just always say, even the tiniest bit helps. If you help one person, you're helping actually a multitude of people.
Yeah. And maybe it's about, beyond those places, reaching out to some of the communities around you, the charities near you,
Exactly.
and seeing what's help and support that they need, and whether that's something that you can offer either yourself or through your organisation to help them with skills or with different things that you might need. So brilliant. Thank you so much for joining me today, Rebekah. It's been wonderful. And I think some great advice there around what we could do, stepping out of our comfort zones, and how actually that volunteering, even if it's a bit of mandatory volunteering, can actually really help us all to get some joy and to develop our skills. So it's a real double win.
Brilliant. It's been an absolute pleasure, Beth.
Thank you.
Well, a huge thank you to Rebekah for joining us today and talking all about the wonderful world of giving back, of doing work in the community investment, and how that can bring us all some work joy. There were some things that I really took away. This idea of seeing is believing, getting out there and understanding a world beyond the world we usually play in, the world beyond our world of work. of different people, different situations, different backgrounds, different experiences, different challenges, and how that can really help us to understand our own privilege and to understand how we can help and support other people in our worlds, whether that's in our organisations or through volunteering, stepping out there, doing those worlds. I love the idea of this mandatory volunteering as well, that it's built in and integrated into the working day, into the working life, and how much joy that can give people. And the other thing I'm really taking away, and I am going to be thinking about this a lot, I think, over the next few weeks, is this: what are the days that I remember at work? The ones that are great, the ones that I recall when I'm looking backwards. And such a great way of thinking about how do we track some of our work joy. If you remember those days, what was going on for you? What was happening? What was the environment? What was the situation? Because that's a really good way of understanding what brings you some joy and being able to do more of it more often. And that will build you lots more work joy. And obviously some great advice there around the excitement and fear are the same things, physiologically the same, but we interpret them differently. But what could you do if you could get excited versus nervous or feeling fear, and really stepping out of that comfort zone, and obviously looking after ourselves first, which is something that I think many of us find quite difficult, but something that is really, really important too. So a huge thank you again to Rebekah for joining me on this episode of the WorkJoy Jam. Do come and follow us on all the socials. We're at Create WorkJoy. We'd love to have you joining in and engaging with some of the content that's out there. We also have, if you're interested in getting more involved, Club WorkJoy. And Club WorkJoy is a fantastic community of people from many different organisations who are coming together, both online and in some of our events, where we help people and help each other to create and cultivate more joy in their lives. We have monthly events with keynote speakers, we have networking sessions, we have weekly Ask Beth Anything, all kinds of things. So do go and have a look if you are interested in joining our community. And also, if you look on our website, createworkjoy.com, there is a freebie that you can download. It is all about how do you get yours and helps you to track and understand where you're getting your work joy from. So please go download that, and we would love you to help you get some joy in your life. So thank you for listening. Do go and listen to some of the other episodes. I'm Beth Stallwood, and I will speak to you again soon.